The aha moment is when science meets imagination, and out of that union comes the future. The breakthrough, the innovation, the revelation. Good grades are nice, but the aha moment changes the world. So keep dreaming, Wells. This week, Everwhen comes out, and it's the Doomsday Vault, and it is just an amazing book. And we are so fortunate today because we have Thomas Wheeler on the Adventures in Learning podcast. If you don't know who Thomas Wheeler is, you know his work. You've seen his Academy Award nominated Puss in Boots. You've seen the Lego Ninjago movie. You might have seen Empire for ABC or The Cape for NBC, or most recently, Cursed. Thomas is an accomplished screenwriter, producer, author, and we are so lucky to have him on today's Adventures in Learning. So, welcome to the Adventures in Learning, Tom. You've got a book coming out this week, and it's a pretty phenomenal book. I gobbled it up over a 2 day spread, and I found that I was reminded of so many books that I love, but this was completely unique and different as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and
Thank you.
why you think it's special?
Why I think it's special. I it's funny. I tend to kind of lunge into new creative projects before, considering all the possible complications or whatever. This this idea came to me in a meditation. And I like that it sounds like that's like I sound really kind of spiritual and I don't meditate all the time. I mean, I'm a sporadic meditator. So, but when I do it, I find it very fruitful and very, in any event, what came to me was just the words, the College of Space Machines, Multiverses, and Other Odd Sciences. And I think the lead character Bertie Wells came pretty quickly to me, and the ending of the book. And I don't know, we can give away spoilers or whatnot, but there's a this idea of a time travel school. Originally, I was going to call it Cosmos, but Carl Sagan's company had a slight issue with that. But I love Everwhen. I think it's a better title. Uh, and there's just sometimes something kind of strikes where you just say, I just want to be there. I want to go to that school. And had, I am such a science enthusiast, but I'm
Same.
not a scientist by any stretch of the imagination. Um, and that's one of the themes of the book is really how does imagination participate in the process of science and in the discoveries of science, and it feels integral to me. And I all my life was have been, I love science. I think science is the practical road to magical solutions to things. And if I could play a small part in just getting a young reader or an older reader to say, like, "Oh, I want to find out a little bit more about that," even though there's lots of absurdity and wackiness going on and crazy liberties being taken on, I felt like that was a great way to spend my time. I hadn't done a book in this sort of range of readership. And as I say, and I think the intro, I just was such a fan of Douglas Adams. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was a hugely impactful book, and even just the cover, it just always felt like a great secret. Like I got to find out what's inside that, in those
Yeah.
pages, because it seems like such a and so this was really, in some ways, an homage to that fandom of mine for the greatly missed Douglas Adams.
Absolutely. And you talked about Bertie and sort of that character that connects imagination to science. And like you, I'm not a scientist, but I love science and I do science education. I try to
Yeah.
help kids find the joy in connecting to science and all the people who have gone into creating science. And that idea of imagination and surrounding Bertie with those two girls on either side. You've got Zoe, who's the math genius from the future, and Millie, who is your mechanical minded genius from the past. And I loved that trio because I felt like not only were you giving us the science, you were giving us the friendship and what's the value of connection. Can you talk a little bit about the shaping of the three characters, and are we going to see them in subsequent books?
Yeah, I hope so. Yes. That's the plan. Like I said, I think Bertie came to me first because he's H.G. Wells, as we'll discover, and it's not a huge secret, but it has a lot of meaning as the book goes along. And so I liked that aspect as it related to time travel. The others, I just wanted them to have. It seems like everybody, and I would like to say it's by design, but it's almost like these three characters both, they all struggle with a sense of self-worth or value or an anxiety of am I enough? And maybe that's something I wrestle with. I know it's something I've watched my kids wrestle with, particularly in their teen years.
Yeah. It's
It
a
is,
middle grade phenomenon.
yeah, it's ubiquitous, and it's just sort of this anxiety that ties into this. And I think they're bombarded by some external forces that remind them all the time they're not enough, or they should be this, or they should be that. So I find also that kind of uh, that kind of insecurity is also like predecessor to discovery. Like if you're putting yourself out there, and these are creative kids, and I guess in some ways um, they support each other in that way, and I wanted characters that could, through their friendship, offer that value or that sense of support, that reinforcement of you're worthy, and these are great ideas. Millie does that for Bertie when she invents Ingurgisaurus, and I just wanted to see this interaction between them where they were learning to lean on each other and need each other, and then each one in each way. Bertie at some point is like, oh my gosh, you're like, Leonardo, Millie's big brother is Leonardo da Vinci, which is
A lot to live up to.
heck of a thing to deal with. And it's very funny. My Millie da Vinci is named after my daughter, who's my younger one. And I've watched her live in the shadow of a big brother who, you know, brings a lot to the table. He's a very accomplished kid and all that. And that resonated with me because I've seen her deal with that. And so I thought there was I just I like characters with a chip on their shoulder who, have something to prove, and
Right.
also um with Bertie, this sense of like, "Oh, what am I doing here?" I've looked back at it and I'm like, it's like me writing this book. Me going like, what am I doing here? Like what? I don't really know what I'm talking, but I had so much fun doing it and just felt like what I could bring was as much as imagination as my brain could muster. I just felt that's what I owed to this idea, and that's what I tried to do.
Well, and you come from the film and entertainment industry. You've written Puss in Boots, you did the Lego movie, you've got some really cool TV behind you. Did that world building sort of help you shape the world building of Everwhen? Because I could visualize everything. And this is a complicated world you built because there are so many
Crazy.
rules about going back and forth in time. And what happens if you change one thing? What does it do to everything else? How did you build that world and how did you keep track of it all?
Keeping track of it all was a bit of a mess. I was actually writing the animated feature version of this story at the same time, which was both a great help and an incredible pain in the butt, to be honest, because something changes here and then you go, oh God, do I readjust this, or something really good pops up. I'm like, oh, I want to use that, or a problem arises and you're now feeling like, oh, that's not it. So there was a lot of that. In general, I think when you're writing, usually like studio executives love to just hammer you on the rules, which really takes so much fun. I mean, you're constantly answering questions like, I don't like, is any audience member going to care that we're answering this? It's just a note, right? And so
Yeah.
you get a lot of notes about your world. And in many cases, it makes your world smaller because you're trying to accommodate all of these. Whereas with this, and perhaps experience led me here to just say, you know what, I'm letting this absolutely just be the bananas world it is. I love the idea of a school that's just got its just barely two wheels on the road, you know. I mean, it's just hanging on in terms of what they're putting these kids through. I love the idea of balancing that sense of humor and sense of fun with some real emotion, you know, and trying to balance those two is tricky, right? You know,
Right.
it's what constitutes a real problem and what constitutes a fun problem, and making sure that, one is trying to strike that balance. Because I honestly, I kind of think that's what Douglas Adams did too. You know, these just lunatic rides of, fun and craziness. I don't think he was too preoccupied with his with his rules,
Right.
but you were completely along for the ride. You were invested in his characters, and there was such a heart to what he did. And so I think that's was kind of critical to see our characters in their real world at first, and to sort of land us with them. And as long as we had a strong sense of who they were and what they were struggling with, then they were our eyes and ears into this incredibly special place, where a lot is going on. And and during the process of writing the screenplay multiple times, and I hope to continue to write it multiple. It's an ongoing process. The You do get to test some things. You get to test some things, and you do get to work some things out. And you go like, okay. And so I would go back to the book and make my editor crazy, be like, Justin, I'm just going back in again. It's just a little, and then it would turn into this massive. But the good news is that during this process, and it took, to get here, there's also a lot of ideas that didn't make it in, which are great, and characters that I love that aren't in there yet. But there are some really fun characters from the future that I love and love their voices. I think readers will love. And so, I think in a sequel you would see how how that next year sort of tilts a little more toward the future and what that's like. This was a lot of dealing with the past and Zoe's loss and dealing with that. And so it'd be fun to kind of point the target toward the future and what are those challenges and good things, headed our way.
And you've got the creative canvas that each semester can take place in a different time.
Yes, I don't feel bound by any, there will be new challenges. It's a big, big canvas. And yeah, I think what I have for a next book, or I feel like I have the characters, and it's sort of like what would be the best plot. There's a lot in this one. There's a lot of concepts and things that are fun. Uh, and I want to make sure the next one can match that and still offer the same character journeys and have it be still emotionally fulfilling.
Well, and I think that you're off to a great start. Like I
Thank
said,
you.
this was such a fun read, but within it, there are all these beautiful nuggets too. As you said, there's the deeper issues, there's the lighter moments, and you've got some cool science Easter eggs in there. As a science enthusiast, can you let people know what they should be looking for in terms of some of those Easter eggs?
There's there's an interesting encounter with Schrodinger's cat, which I'm not sure is in any way actually applicable to the actual Schrodinger's cat, but I think for those who are like, oh, these are concepts that I want to pay attention to. Um, the haunted formula is this sort of multi-page wrestling match between Zoe and this unsolvable theorem on this in this haunted part of Everwhen, this place called Chrono Hall, where, the first time machine was created. And what I can say is is some real mathematics happening in there. There are some real concepts happening in there. I did completely draft my son, who is the mathematician of the family. You know, that was our own wrestling match. Like, okay, this is what I want it to feel. This is how I want it. How do we get to this point? And he's like, you're going to solve, and it has to solve, and it has to create and bring you to a space in time. Yes, it's going to create, and bring you to a. So it was really fascinating to watch. He's an amazing brain. I can't take any credit for it whatsoever, but an excellent mathematics kid. And so we walked through it, and it was really, I think there are some concepts that, advanced math folks will be able to follow. There's some big leaps made, but it was important to me that roadmap led through actual, mathematical ideas and concepts and famous theorems, et cetera, to bring us to this place called the Eternity Box, which happens to be a elaborate prison that Zoe discovers a important character to the story in. Um, those are a couple that come to mind. There was a lot of sort of fun and agony in the time paradoxes that take place. What constitutes interdimensionality versus time travel versus versus multiple time streams. And sometimes I just have to sit back and be like, okay, I what but I believe my goal was I don't want to totally lose people here.
Right.
But I also want it to be loose and fun enough that we don't feel constrained, or I didn't want it to feel necessarily like a lecture, or that we were eating too many of our vegetables there. It was meant to convey the amazing possibilities ahead of us. So that was always sort of the goal, is let's not get so crazy or contradictory that we're losing the thread, but let's make sure that what's happening to these kids is fun and silly and adventurous.
Well, and I liked that analogy of the vegetables because I used to make cakes for my kids when they were small, and you would tuck the vegetables into the
Sneak them
cake.
in. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
And you did a great job with that because it doesn't stand out, but it's fun to find. And then you've got sort of various historical figures who come into play, or you sort of see a name and go, "Ooh, I wonder if they're related to so and so." And maybe it'll be the spark that gets a kid to want to know more and take a rabbit hole dive into a deeper concept too.
There's a great stretch, or a fun stretch, where Bertie's chasing or being chased through time, and we land on these various areas, and some of the areas, it was something like Millie da Vinci. We don't really know if Leonardo had a younger sister. That might be but there were also areas where I wanted to be, what did it actually feel like, or give it little detail that honors the place and time that he arrives in, but also is a lot of fun, and he messes up some critical
Pretty big
historical moments.
pieces. Yeah.
Poor Hannibal has to turn around in the
I
mountains.
know the tears in Hannibal's eyes. That was the one that
Yeah,
came to mind.
yeah. And so, but there are also incredible moments. I adore history, and so yeah, if anyone's kind of like, what is that? Did they cross elephants cross a thing, or how did they build the Great Wall, or even I'm realizing like the introduction of the iPhone was a historical moment, and so
Right.
he was made sure to mess that up too. So yeah, that is you have to have that in a time
Yes.
travel story. It's largely a story that takes place in the school, but I felt like if you've got a time scooter, if you got your own personal time machine, you need to kind of raise
You
get
have
some
to
trouble
take it
going
for a
on.
whirl.
You gotta go do some riding.
So you were working on the book and you were working on the screenplay at the same time. Um, that sounds very complicated. And I'm wondering, book is out January 28th. When should we expect the movie version?
Well, that's a great question. What I can say is we have like a really amazing team. A producer, Lorenzo de Bonaventura, who did the Transformers, and Mark Barati and his partner, and director Scott Mosier, who did the Grinch for Illumination. And we have a great creative team. We've been working with the team at Paramount. Some of those folks I worked with when we were at DreamWorks on Puss in Boots, and they've been great supporters. These movies take a minute. They're, animation takes a minute, so it would probably be a couple years as we're getting underway. I mean, I think the earliest would be 27, probably. Where are we now? 25. Yeah, that
Yeah.
I hope that's the case. Maybe we can get other books out in the meantime. I certainly hope so. It's a really fun world to visit. And like I said, I think ultimately doing both. I've done this before with this Netflix show I did called Cursed, where I was finishing the book and running a writer's room to launch these 10 episodes. And that was also, it's stressful, but you get to kick the tires of your ideas in very sort of boots on the ground, functional way. Like, does this, is this working? Does this play? Because often you're writing alone in your room, and it's just whatever. But you don't, but in situations like this, you're really putting them out there and getting a lot of feedback. So I think that can be helpful as long as I said earlier, you still like the book is its own thing, and I'm going to have as much fun as possible because I think the reader will have as much fun as possible if I'm having fun. I do think that correlates. So, um, while I think the feature has gone through more kind of chiseling and like making sure this makes sense, and we can't have too many ideas all the way to the end, and we have to do, the book has a little bit more freedom and I think probably joy at the moment in terms of just uh, hopefully imaginative ideas all the way through and it stays a fun ride.
That's awesome. So, Tom, one of the questions I love to ask my guests is tell us a little bit about your adventures in learning. How did you get to where you are today? Sort of what started? Did you always want to be a writer?
I was an early writer. I was a big fantasy kid. I was a big Dungeons and Dragons kid, comic books. I was a classic sort of Stranger Things 80s class,
Yep.
um raised by a single mom. My older brother and I had a lot of time on our hands. We, got in a lot of trouble. I feel that, some of those adventures, tromping through the woods, getting chased, being in trouble, like these are interesting teachers, in your life
Absolutely.
and for your creative life. So I do sometimes think about the way my kids grew up, which is very different. And they're both excellent writers in their own way. So, you don't have to have my crazy upbringing. But I think I do draw on that all the time. And I think, thank goodness for things like Dungeons and Dragons or the fantasy novels I read. I wasn't a great student. I was distracted. Things I was interested in, I would pour myself into, but I don't know. I was always sort of interested in what was going on outside, but I was really interested in theater. My grades would kind of suffer, but what I would be doing on my spare time is handwriting a novel. I wrote a book when I was in seventh grade, and but I was also hard on myself, and I think my dad. I had a creative family. My mother was an actress, and she was also a reporter in Philadelphia News. My dad had his own children's television show for about 30 years, up until about the mid 70s. Both creative people. It was a very theatrical household,
Right.
very, creative people. My dad was an excellent writer, but struggled and I think judged himself, and I think that passed on to me. So I had done a lot of writing as a young person, middle schooler,
Yeah.
and then sort of let it go because I just felt I wasn't very good. And, I was going to be an actor and I was going to do this and whatever. And in my around 20, I picked it up again. The quick story, I had gone backpacking on my own had saved up a little money and went to Europe for a couple months on my own. I thought I was Jack Kerouac. I was going to do the whole, that was definitely an adventure. And I kept a journal the whole time. I didn't take pictures. I met this person and this is what they were like. And I did this. And I was like, and on the plane ride home after a couple of months, I fell asleep and must have kicked the journal under the chair in front of me and lost it.
Oh no.
And came home and wanted to show, and I couldn't find that whole experience, and so I was devastated, and I was calling the airport, and after a few weeks, they were like, Tom, like they knew me by name, and like it's not coming back, man, and so a few people were telling me to, you got to write it down again, and I was like, that sounds horrible. Like, what?
Right. I've got to recreate this.
I've got to do this again, and I did. And it completely reawakened that spark of writing. And I have that journal, it wasn't a novel. It was a sort of journal plus kind of, but it really was, I loved it. And it kind of, yeah, it kind of reignited that creative desire to write. And I sort of went from there. And I mourn a little bit not having a bigger college experience. I left NYU after freshman year, I was in a rush. I was just in a rush to get in there, and so I would sort of borrow learning wherever I could, and ever since have used my research and my work to just dive into topics that fascinate me and learn as much as I can about something and in research, as you know, it's just you're trying to get as much as you can it's a very intense kind of learning, and that's how I've compensated. I don't think one should ever stop trying to learn as much as possible and be really humble about it. There's you know it there's so much, and I feel like you can get a little trapped as a writer in research if you stay too long, but I found it to be a great sort of side benefit of a job that's a lot of fun in the first place. But I love to be able to just learn about, history or science, or try to grapple with things that I kind of missed out on in school, because I sort of I was pointed in a different direction.
What would you say are some of your favorite rabbit holes you've gone down in terms of research and teaching
Wow.
yourself and learning?
There's so many. Well, I was able to, for example, with this Netflix show Curse, which was this sort of retelling of the Arthurian legend through the eyes of the Lady of the Lake, um, really was able to dive into the deep end of the pool of, the history of British history, and to visit castles. I was really living in their history and working with designers and artists from that world. And in the West, we sort of take for granted, like, oh, King Arthur sort of belongs to us, and it's all sort of a Western mythology, and yet they take it that's very much theirs. And there was a lot of just wonderful detail and uh, and context to, oh, well, I grew up in Wales, where this particular part of Merlin's legend and Merlin's cave is there. And and there was just all sorts of really just great kind of muscle tissue to the myth that I
Right.
never would have kind of gotten on my own, and that I think really kind of added to that, and was any opportunity. I did a novel years ago called The Arcanum, and I love biographies. I love when I know I'm going to be have a historical character to deal with. This was everyone was slightly different because we see them in such fleeting flashes. Although I did a lot of H.G. Wells research, but for Arcanum, it was really important to sort of have the voice of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Houdini, or these
Right.
characters that form this kind of X-Files sort of group. But I love that. It's almost like you're playing a role. You're in their life. You're learning about their world. And so you're just taking this great dive. But it's also like you're kind of trying on the clothes of, like, how am I going to play this, and how do they talk, and what's the cadence, and what do they feel like, and you start to sort of, it is a little bit like almost preparing for a performance in some ways. And then when you've kind of done enough, you start to feel like they're talking, you're in there, and I love that feeling, and I think research is really critical for that. I think that effort, if I go back and read, I'm sure I'd be like, oh my God, it's like my first book, and you're like, oh, there's a lot to learn there, but I did love that research and felt that clicked it for me in a way. I'd written a few screenplays before. I started really young. I did a lot of learning on the job. Not recommended necessarily. It's kind of stressful. Boy, there's a lot I don't know about what I'm now doing here. But yeah, over that was a big learning experience, and I appreciated the value of research through that book. And then subsequently had my first TV experience where you put your scripts up against actors and you start seeing your stuff performed, and you really learn quickly then, like, okay, all right, okay, say less, let's do, and that's another fantastic learning. That's a great classroom.
Absolutely. So you've had all of these classrooms and all of these ways to learn. If you were to distill that into something you'd want a younger person who wants to follow in your footsteps to know, or your younger self, what would you tell them? What would be some lessons you might give them?
Some of the things I talk to my kids about, first of all, I tell them it's a little graphic, but I say, like, I want, you got to bleed on the page a little bit. And I just mean, um, maybe it's a friend you remember from growing up who had a really specific voice, or maybe it's, what really hurt, like find those moments in your own life where you were really feeling something. And if you can put that into a character, if you can, there's just all these little things that are going to make your voice unique. It's going to make there's only so many genres, right? There's only so many, we've seen this kind of story or what, but everyone has something utterly unique to themselves. And if you can find what those little nuggets are, and your work will start to have a voice. It'll start to, at the very least, like, there will be something connecting us, something universal connecting us. So I do recommend that. I My first screenplay that I wrote with the intention of sort of like showing to people was based on a Dungeons and Dragons character I had from years before, because it took away some of the pressure and the angst. It was just play. It was just
Right.
play. And for writers who are starting out, for my son, he's loved anime. He loves watching, he loves all these characters. He gets very invested. I was like, write an anime, like, write your version, write what's fun. Whatever can get those gears going in a playful way, like, oh, I wish they'd done that in the thing. Well, I can do that in my thing. I can just, that is, it is play. I'm still playing. My office has got toys and, game. Like, I mean, I need to kind of get into this. There's a lot of things. I have to pay a mortgage. I have things to,
Right.
but I have to, when I sit down to work, I gotta remind myself of, like, what is that play space that I need? What kind of head do I need to get into? And for me, it's sort of just, something that is fun and low stakes. Anything is possible, and just try to, and that, I think, opens the aperture for me. So those are two places to start, of just don't take it so seriously, underthink it, go, pick your favorite game, your favorite character, maybe write as your favorite character for a while, get into playing with voices. I tell my son, he wants to direct maybe someday, I'm like, pick up your phone and shoot a scene, just like, don't take it all so seriously, and don't judge yourself. I think I do it, we all do it, but when you're starting out, and it was hard for me to finish my first screenplay. My dad had a lot of trouble finishing his writing work, and I had a big complex about that. So, but I was putting a lot of pressure for it to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. There's to be some stuff where
Right.
you revise it, and over time you realize, like, ugh, revision is, there are some moments of revision where I'm like, yeah, like, yes, like, I can't wait to go in there and fix that up. It's going to be, um, that's a harder process, and I really think some writers just never get there. Like they never quite embrace that. It feels like I got to do it all over, But of course,
Right.
there were some scenes in Puss in Boots I wrote, and I'm not kidding. I think I wrote one of those. I think I wrote a prison scene with Puss in Boots and the Kitty like 200 times. It was just. I mean, I was not happy by the 199th time. I was like, I think I've done as many of these as I can. I think I've however, it's just part of it. If you ever want to do this professionally, you're going to do it all over a number of times, and it gets better, and it's sculpting, and you're just you're just chipping away. It's a sprawling answer for your question,
Oh,
but
it was a great answer. And as you said, at 200, you finally got there.
we got there. Yeah, it was with a little help, but yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a different, much different writing process. It's very surgical, and there's also a team, just a story team of about 20 people that you're jousting with and collaborating with, and yeah, it's its own interesting realm.
So, last question for today. And I'm going to drop all the links to Everwhen in the show notes because I want you all to go out and get this book. It is so good.
Thank you.
But my last question for today, it's one I feel is so important, is what brings you hope?
Wow, what brings me hope? My kids bring me hope. You know, uh, they're good people, and they're hopeful, which I think is great because I think my generation's like, oh, this is change, this is crazy, this is stressful, this is anxiety provoking. Like, oh, what? There's some things they can kind of brush off, and there's I do believe the future is hopeful. I do. I can be anxious like everyone. I can be concerned about the state of things, but the I feel like the future's coming at us, and there are some real possibilities out there, particularly as they relate to science, that are exciting and could really um, improve the quality of many people's lives. And I think I can get discouraged about politics. I can get discouraged about, I can be concerned about the environment. I mean, we're in Southern California, and Mother Nature just
Right.
kicked everybody in the head. Thank goodness we're okay. I have friends who are not, doing as you know, the it's intense, but I really when I look at my kids, their friends, I think we're all going to be okay. I think they see a lot of things in a healthy way. They don't take some things so seriously, and I guess for myself, having a few decades behind me, I mean, you see cycles to things, and I think we can get very rooted to the moment because everything now is immediate, and just everybody's
Right.
huge crisis is our crisis immediately, and it's almost hard to separate um but I think there tends to be a self-correcting mechanism in place, and sometimes it feels more extreme than necessary. But yeah, I'm excited about the future, and I think science will lead the way. And I'm not apocalyptic about certain discoveries. My son works in is getting his master's in artificial intelligence, and we talk about the possibilities there. And there will be disruptions, there will be economic disruptions, there will be things that are change, and you don't know how that change will feel, but there's so much possibility. It's going to be a really interesting next, 30 to 50 years. I mean, I'm fascinated. I don't,
Right.
it might be boisterous, it might be tumultuous. But it's going to be interesting. And I think we'll see a lot of change. And I feel like for the longest time, it felt like 2000 was the future. Like we're here. Like where are the flying cars?
Right. Where's the Jetsons?
Where's the Jetsons? And I feel like we might be seeing the Jetsons pretty soon. I mean, it's going to be really, it's interesting, and I'm fascinated. It's I there, everybody gets down sometimes. My kids get anxious sometimes, but they're I think there's good people coming up to take care of things. So I feel like we can look forward to that, and those things give me hope.
Agreed. Well, Tom Wheeler, thank you so much for being on the Adventures in Learning podcast. Everwhen comes out this week, and you all need to get yourselves a copy.
Thank you. This was such a pleasure. I appreciate you having me.